Passion in my pocket, so my pennies should be what they selling is cheap, so I'm buying that this freedom is free. I've been becoming me. See, when Jesus taking the lead, with purpose I bleed and rise like going under the heat. Defeat is a never. You can't reattach what is severed. What's bringing you pleasure can tell you where you stacking your treasure. When storm is your weather, know that it gets worse for it's better.
Welcome to the Esau Macaulay podcast. I'm your host, Esau Macaulay. Today on the podcast, we are blessed to have Alissa Wilkinson, a movie reviewer for the New York Times. Thank you for coming on our podcast, Alissa.
Yeah, I'm so glad I could. It's a nice cold day here in New York, and I am tucked into a soundproof booth at the time, so I can chat with you.
Oh, that's pretty cool. I've never actually been in one of the soundproof booths, but I've seen them when I visited there. Yeah, so we have this thing in the podcast where we like to ask people about stuff that they're not actually skilled in. So since you're doing movies, we're going to ask you about television. And so we're going to ask you to do this. And we don't give people the opportunity to prepare these questions. So this is Alissa off the dome. Just this.
I'm
ready. I need you to think of 3 TV shows that explain your energy during middle or high school. So like, what are the 3 TV shows that popped into your mind that you used to watch that you kind of, these are my shows?
So this is a little tricky. Actually, this is great because I was homeschooled. And I wasn't just homeschooled, I was like very homeschooled, if you know what I mean. Yeah, in the 90s. So at the time, I would say like a huge amount of what I watched, and this probably explains a little bit about me, were like those documentaries that they ran during pledge drives on PBS.
Oh my goodness.
They're like all Ken Burns documentaries, 6 parts about like baseball or trains or I don't know, like dad stuff. So I would watch those. And I also watched like a lot of that kind of stuff, I think.
Yeah.
And then on occasion, because of the age that I am, I would catch like a TV show here or there, like if I was at a friend's house or a grandparent's house. And the show that like sticks out to me that I always think of as emblematic of the time was Felicity, which was that Carrie Russell show.
Yes.
Where, she went to NYU or they called it something else, but it was NYU in the show.
Yeah.
And I think it gave me a good sense of like what New York was like, which is, it was actually kind of weirdly accurate. When I would come here, I could go to Dean and DeLuca, and like they worked at Dean and DeLuca, so that was just funny. But yeah, no, a lot of my TV watching at that time was really boring.
Now I'm going to feel like the big sinner in the thing, because I have list that I thought, it wasn't that bad. It was Martin. That was the TV show. Martin was one that I used to watch as a kid. And then I would watch A Different World. I don't know if you heard about that one.
Okay, yes.
And what was the other one? Martin, A Different World, and Cosby Show would just be dishonest. Maybe Family Matters. If I can toss in like Family Matters. And now I've always had to have like 2 versions, because we watched the super black shows growing up, but we also had the other ones. So these are probably the ones that I was like, what are the other white shows I used to watch all of the time? And here's 3 that maybe you saw later. I would say, what's it called? Golden Girls. Shockingly, I used to love the TV show Golden Girls.
Oh, yeah.
And I used to love Cheers.
And a great show.
And probably, shockingly, the show that had me on a chokehold in high school or middle school, whenever it came out, that I used to watch every episode of, is, and I just forgot about, The Wonder Years.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a great one. A classic.
And I still feel something whenever I hear that the theme song. It is just like it's good. So you were stuck in homeschool purgatory, and so you didn't get a chance to be corrupted by all of those television shows.
Well, I will say my grandmother loved watching Cheers at night, and so sometimes I would watch with her when I was like a kid. And I have since watched it as an adult. That's a great show.
Yes, and also in Living Color. I feel like now, whenever I list 3 black shows, I'm going to get like black social media yelling at me if I didn't pick the right ones. So, but you don't actually review television shows. You review.
I haven't. Yeah. I mean, I used to, in previous jobs or when I was freelancing, I would sometimes write about TV, but it's really, really hard, as you can imagine. Yeah. I mean, partly just because it's long and partly because it's never really over, and so writing about it is so different from writing about movies, which are, even sequels and franchises stuff are pretty self-contained within themselves.
So eventually you're going to tell us about the best movies we need to see or the best movies of 2025. And maybe you would give us some Christmas recommendations. But the first question I want to ask you is, how does one become a movie reviewer, especially when you start off with Ken Burns' documentary? It didn't feel like you were consuming a lot of media. How did you get into movie reviews?
So my background is in totally other things. I, have studied a lot of different areas. I have an undergrad degree in like information technology, and then I have master's in humanities and in creative writing. But I was pretty bored in my first job, and I just was living in New York. So I started seeing a lot of movies and thinking about them and talking about them with, my boyfriend at the time, who I've been married to for 18 years now. And he was working in film and had gone to film school. So there was a little bit of a, knowledge base there. And then I just thought I'd try it. I don't know. It's a really boring answer. And so I Googled how to write for magazines and then learned what you do.
Wait a minute. I want people to understand what it means to have a dream. So you are a full-time reviewer for the New York Times, and you Googled how to do this, and it started you down the path you actually did. So if you're looking for a career and you could think of it in a sentence, podcast audience, type it into Google and you're set. You're the first person to give that advice. When I say, how do you do something? You said, just Google it.
It's kind of funny because I get a lot of emails from people who are like, well, how can I do what you do? And how do I? And I'm like, honestly, just Google it. It will tell you how, what is the procedure? And the what you do is you email editors and you say, hello, I would like to write this piece for you. And then if it goes well, then they keep having you back. And then, that's how you build a career. And I always had other jobs. So the Times, I've been here a year, and this is the first job this is the first media job I've had where this is my primary occupation. So prior to this, I worked for Vox.com, and I also was teaching college full time, and I did that for 15 years. I've worked for a whole succession of nonprofits. Yeah. Just all kinds of nonprofits.
Our audience might be interested in the fact that it was King's College that you worked for immediately before. Right. So the other thing is, if your university closes, that's another good way to transition into full-time writing.
One way to get booted out the door. Yeah, I mean, I'll still be adjuncting come the spring, but it was a bit of an abrupt thing. Yeah. But I was there for 15 years before they closed. Which was, a really good experience. And I was always writing on the side, and that's kind of what I've always been doing. And I haven't only written about movies until this job again, in my previous job. So Vox.com, pretty big, or it looks like a pretty big website, but it actually has a pretty small staff, which meant that, if you're a writer about film, you might also end up writing about TV and politics and food resources and all kinds of things. So coming to the Times, it's much bigger, much more stable. And I, got here and they were like, we really just want you to write criticism and reviews about movies. And I was like, oh, this is different, but I like it. So I've been able to concentrate a little more on that.
So I have a son who sometimes says as his career, he wants to do video games. And because it sounds like it's fun all of the time because you're doing the thing that you love as a job. But as someone for whom now it's your job to watch movies.
Yes.
Is it I know it's a job. Does it feel like work? How has working full time writing about movies changed what for everyone else is a leisure activity? Now it's your full time job. Do you still like movies? How does it work now?
I do. I mean, you would never do this job if you didn't like movies because it doesn't pay well enough. You could be doing practically anything else and making more money. And it is, a lot of my job is watching not even bad movies, but just kind of fine movies, movies I would never normally watch or never normally choose to watch. And I have to watch them because it's my job. And that part of the job can be a bit of a slog when you look at your calendar and you're like, oh, I have to spend tonight like schlepping to Midtown to watch a movie that I will be astonished if it's good. You always hold out hope and sometimes you're surprised, but usually that's not how it works. But there's so much that's fun about it too, because you get to you get to see things before other people do. And so often you are discovering something that's great or a new artist or an interesting voice. And also, most of the job is not the watching. Most of the job is writing and being edited and trying to like craft something really good that people will want to read whether or not they see the movie. And that part of the job, what's required of you is to be a good writer. And that's the part that people forget, that like this is a job that is predominantly about writing, not predominantly about movies, which is why people can jump to other kinds of criticism.
So you've been watching movies all year, and we're now in December. So I think that all of the movies that are going to be on the list for top 5 movies of 2024 are out. And so they're doing I don't know if are you going to do an article about this? Are you going to release it?
It just came out. It came out over the weekend. Yeah.
Oh, I missed it. See, look at this. I've not seen it. So we'll put a link. I don't know if do we put links in bios? Mike, can we put a link to this? Mike, jump onto the podcast.
Yes, we can put links in the show notes.
Okay, man, look at that. He's like, yes, Esau, I can do basic stuff that a producer can do.
I can copy and paste. I am capable of that, Esau.
I just want to give you a chance to jump on the podcast. I want to ask you, we're going to jump back into this, Alissa. Mike, have you seen your social media pop since I've been giving you a little bit of shine? Are you seeing your numbers climb?
I'm just not very active on social media.
But this I'm saying I'm turning our producer into a person on the show. I'm making him a part of it.
Excellent.
He's becoming a little bit arrogant. It's becoming a little bit of a thing. It's like he wants to be called the Esau and the Mike show. That's a problem. But we'll go back. So you put that in the bio. And so what were your top 5 films that you have for us this year?
So Alissa? I should say there are 2 staff critics at the Times. There's me and Manola is the chief film critic. So if you when you open the article, you'll see her list and then my list. And it was really interesting because they tell us we can only pick 10 apiece. And last year we had a lot of overlap. And this year we only had 1 movie that was on both of our lists, which is kind of funny. So there's 19 movies there. But my number 1 movie, which hasn't come out yet, but I hope everybody pays attention to it because I think it's going to be a big one.
It's not out yet? We only have like less than a month left in the year.
On the 13th. So it'll be out very soon. And it's played at festivals. It's sort of been playing around for a long time. Is adaptation of Nickel Boys, Colson Whitehead's novel. So this is a film adaptation of it, directed by Ramel Ross, who has normally been a documentarian and has been really interested in making films that are about the way Black American life is depicted in the movies, if that makes sense. So his movies are kind of about how we look at things. But this is an adaptation of a novel. And he does something, I kind of don't want to spoil it, but he does something really incredible and sort of radical with the way it's just like kind of amazing that it works as well as it does. But it's also just like a straight ahead story of 2 boys at a reform school in the South in the 50s. So it's great. I hope everybody goes and sees it. It's coming out the 13th. That one's Nickel Boys.
And that was your number 1?
That was my number 1. And the second one is Eno, which is a documentary about Brian Eno, the musician and artist, which was kind of a wild movie because Brian Eno is sort of idiosyncratic. And he said he wouldn't participate in a documentary about him unless it was unless it was experimental, essentially.
Okay.
And so what they wound up doing was building an engine, not an AI, just like an engine, a big piece of code that would create the documentary on the fly. So I've seen it 3 times and it was different each time. It was a different movie. And it basically the thing selects from among 10,000 hours of footage and sort of creates a new documentary every time you watch it. So it's just really, really good. And it's actually just a film about creativity and what does it mean to be creative and how is creativity sort of a gift to humanity. And it's really good. Yeah, so that was great.
Wait a minute. So you can't promise me that the version of the movie that I'm going to see will be good. You would just say that because you don't know which one I'm going to see. There's 10,000 hours.
It's true. I saw 3 versions of it, and all of them were good. So I feel comfortable saying like you're probably going to see a good movie. But I think about 50% of the footage is the same. Yeah. But then 50% of it is different. So there's like footage of him working with U2 and footage of him working with like David Bowie and all of this.
But if you go to tell your friend, oh, I love this movie, and then did you see this part? The answer could be no. And they can never see that part again.
Right. So one of the things that Brian Eno is famous for is having written the little like Windows chime, when you used to. And apparently the first time it was shown, again, it's like somewhat random. The first time it was shown at a festival, that bit wasn't in there. And the friend was saying that his friend had come back from the screening and said like, I really liked the film, but it was so weird they didn't talk about the Windows thing. And then he went and saw it, and that was in the film. So, it's just different every time. But this has actually been really fun because there were people who went and saw it a dozen times when it was playing in New York this summer. And you can like have a really fun conversation with people who've seen it about like, oh, did you see this? Did you see that? And so it's like an experience as much as it is an actual, it sounds gimmicky, but it's not. You actually get a documentary about creativity, the ways people's brains create things. Like it's a very interesting, good movie.
Okay, now what is third?
So third was Honora, which I think is a movie that a lot of people have heard about. The director of it, Sean Baker, made a movie that I think a lot of people saw, The Florida Project, years ago. And he's made some other movies. He's very interested in movies about people who are kind of on society's margins. This one is about a girl who kind of like works at like an exotic club in Midtown, but she meets this Russian oligarch kid and kind of has this like... Yes. And then has this kind of fairy tale romance that goes very south. It's, not necessarily the kind of movie you would like watch with your kids, but it's a really great movie, I think.
So maybe I can ask you this. Is it possible to make your list if like 1 billion people saw it? And so like your first 3 are, I would say, not blockbusters. And so is there like a taste thing where you think the best movies are the most idiosyncratic? Maybe I can ask you, like, what's your favorite big film? Is that a fair question to ask you?
That is a fair question. So this hasn't been a great year for blockbusters, as opposed to, say, last year, where you had, like, Barbie and Oppenheimer were the 2 biggest earners, and they were great, interesting, outside-the-box movies. Oppenheimer, like, won Best Picture. That doesn't happen all that often. I was talking to someone about this. I can explain in brief my theory. So one is that a corporation like Disney or Warner Brothers, which is owned by, I don't even know who they're owned by at this point, but they're all owned by giant corporations. And their goal is to invest a ton of money into the product and then make a ton of money off the product, right? So they need it to be as appealing to as many people as possible, which is a great way to make a very commercially viable product. But it is not a great way to make great art. Like great art by nature is not appealing to everyone, almost always. Like there are flukes, but for the most part, it's not, because what you're doing when you're watching a work of art is like engaging with the vision of the artist. And so if you're instead engaging with the vision of like corporate executives in a boardroom, like you might still have a great time with the movie, but it has been kind of engineered to be broad, right?
That's one of the things that's been interesting to me as a writer that I had to kind of be comfortable with. Yeah. Because there's different kinds of writers. And the reason I said I want to try to sound not like a snob. So I'm going to resist my snobbery ways. But what I realized is that I could try to write a book in my head that a lot of people are going to like. But the attempt to write that book kind of separates me from my art. I'm only directed towards the audience. And I think that the best work that I've written have been books that, it sounds weird, that were for me, that I want to see out in the world. And I hope that people like them. But if you do that, everybody's not going to like it. And that means that it's not going to be these. And I actually got to this place as a writer a few years ago where I said to myself, I'm going to write the books that I feel like God has put on my heart to write.
Yeah.
And the articles that are interesting to me. And if people are less interested in those things, then that's fine. One of the things that, and there's certain things that I think that are true that are just boring to write about.
Yes.
And so like,
exactly.
As a columnist, it's like there are only so many things that I can say about politics before I've said the stuff that I feel like I need to say. And I just feel like I'm just repeating myself over and over again. And so and so part of what it means, I guess you're saying, to make good art is to be willing to accept a smaller audience for the sake of doing something that is beautiful.
More true to your vision. Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's beautiful, sometimes it's challenging. It could be all kinds of things. But I think if you talk to filmmakers, like their movies are a hard thing in this equation because, at least when you and I write a book, we're mostly sitting down and writing it by ourselves. Like there's some others, but like to make a movie, you need millions of dollars, literally. You need hundreds of people who are going to work on it. You have like all kinds of red tape to go through. It's amazing anybody even manages to make a movie, and that's not even counting like effects and things like that, or how does it get in a theater? And I think what most people don't realize is that a lot of the stuff that actually makes it out in front of them makes it there because it has a huge marketing budget because the company is very invested in making a lot of money back. But you take a great, the great filmmakers who are working today, and a lot of them struggle to get their movies funded. I mean, Martin Scorsese has a hard time getting a movie funded. But, he's really sticking to his guns, and that's why.
So maybe I'll put it this way, I'll find a way to get you to answer this question. Well, then what is a movie that is better than it needed to be? I'll put it that way. And so it's a blockbuster movie, but it didn't need to be as good as it was. But it kind of it rose above its genre.
Yes. And that does happen every year. And like last year was a really good example of that. Yeah. And actually the year before, Top Gun Maverick, I think was like an excellent movie that I had no expectations for. But I'm looking at the list of the top 10 this year as of right now. And Wicked is number 6, but it's probably, I think it's going to move up to number 1. That one I think is, so my feeling is like, I felt fine about it. I was happy. The one on this list of the top 10 box office earners this year that I think was way better than it needed to be was Dune Part 2, which is sitting at number 5 right now.
Yes.
And that's an incredible movie that I did consider for my list, and it didn't make it. Another one I would say at number 14 is The Wild Robot, which is just this incredible animated film that's like really beautiful and thoughtful. A Quiet Place, Day One, I thought was like remarkably good. Kingdom, the Planet of the Apes. So those are all like top 15.
So I would say Dune Part 2. That I'm going to push you and say maybe sometimes I wonder, maybe you should ask yourself this question. If you want to go back and do like your exit analysis, if are your top 10s evenly distributed through the year, or are there things that you've seen most recently? Because I feel like when I saw Dune at the beginning, I thought that the kind of the religious conversation, like the religious theme in Dune, I thought was really interesting in the sense of like people are looking for this Messiah, and like no matter what he did, that was the proof. And so I just thought that Dune as a spectacle, I thought was a really good film. But I'm not gonna
I totally agree. Yeah.
Okay, well, then so we got Dune in your top 5. Then I just convinced you.
Well, I mean, I would say normally, the way that movie studios schedule their releases is that they try to put all the good stuff at the end of the year so that Oscar voters will remember it for the next year. So you're not wrong. But looking at my list, I think the latest I saw a movie on this list is September. And some of these went all the way back to last year because, I see them in a festival context, and then they actually get released this year, and that's when they go on the list. Most of these movies I saw, I'm looking at it right now, in January.
Okay, well then never mind. I will rescind my love for Dune.
But again, that's my job. Yeah. Most people don't think that way.
Yeah. So are there any, we had a conversation about this before the podcast, but are there any kind of movies with religious themes that you found interesting? And there were 2 of them that you mentioned.
Yes. Well, so I should
you say a little bit about them?
Yeah, so I should say previous to my job at Vox, I was the chief film critic at Christianity Today for a few years. And that's really kind of where my antenna went up for, and that was, 10 to 12 years ago. And there were a lot of religious themes in movies at that time. Like Silence came out, First Reformed. There were there was a lot of shows on TV that were about religious themes, like The Leftovers, which is probably one of the best TV shows ever made. But yeah, this year I was sort of chuckling because I saw two within a 24-hour period at the Toronto Film Festival, both of which are out now. So one of them is Heretic, which is this A24 horror film with Hugh Grant. And it's just like a 3-person movie. And the setup is that these two girls are Mormon missionaries and they are visiting, people knocking on doors and sort of asking to have spiritual conversations with them. And they knock on Hugh Grant's door and he is just sort of like a kindly old man. And they're like, we're not really supposed to come in if your wife's not here. And he's like, oh, she's in the kitchen. She's making blueberry pie. And so they're like, oh, okay. So they come in.
Blueberry pie.
Yeah. A24 started selling a blueberry pie candle in tandem with the movie. Yeah. And then the movie kind of takes a turn, and people should know it is technically a horror film. But for the first half of it, it's really a horror film about how you should never talk to a Theo bro in his own house because he'll give you a 40-minute TED talk about his views on religion, which is really what the movie is.
Yeah.
And in the end, the movie actually suggests that this guy is wrong for how he thinks about this, and the girl and her faith win out in the end of the day. So it's a very interesting movie. And that was one movie, and that's sort of a little goofier.
But I know. I think that. I mean, I've seen the commercials. There's there's these rooms they can go into. I don't want to spoil too much of it. This is in the previews. And if you really believed, you can kind of go into this room. And if you don't believe, you can go into that room. And it's like the question of how much do you actually believe this stuff?
Yeah. And how certain are you?
And how certain are you? And so it deals with this issue. And one of the things that I found is interesting about this is that it is an interesting premise about religion and certainty and the tendency for people to lecture. But they have to almost cover it in a horror film in order to ask the question.
So horror films have always been the best place to find religious, one of the greatest religious films of all time is The Exorcist. And, it's fully just a movie about faith and doubt. But I always tell people this is because horror is the kind of the last remaining place where people are willing to entertain the idea of the supernatural. Or at least this was true for a long time, and actually get scared about it or, be interested in it.
So I would tell you that we had a podcast around Halloween where Caitlin, who is one of the other people who are on the Holy Post, she convinced me that I should not turn off all horror films.
Correct.
Maybe because I was traumatized by Nightmare on Elm Street as a kid.
Yeah, well.
And I was raised by a single mom who is great in a lot of ways, but she just had HBO was available if you needed it.
Yeah.
So, there was not a film that I should not have seen that was terrifying. Ring, anything that was scary. I feel like it was Jason. I think I've seen every Jason. And so I didn't watch the philosophical, what is the nature of evil? I watched people are coming to kill you. You should lock your doors.
Yes. I'm not a huge fan of slasher flicks myself, but I think particularly in the 70s, there was just a whole bunch of really intriguing horror films. But horror is a big genre. It's like comedy. It's not every comedy is funny to everybody.
So it might be a good conversation piece. We have our the movie called The Heretic. And what was the other one?
Conclave. So that one is not a horror film. It is more like a political thriller that is set in the Vatican. So the Pope has just died and they need to elect a new Pope. Which is how they do things. And so all the cardinals come to Rome and there's all this kind of intrigue. And at first you think it's going to be kind of a trashy movie, but it's not at all. It's very interesting. And then something happens about 2/3 of the way through that changes everything. But they also, I feel like I'm not Catholic, but I know quite a bit about what's going on with conversations in the Catholic Church and in other branches of Christianity about all kinds of issues, questions about serving the poor and like, what are we here to do? And all this kind of stuff. And those all come up in that film and are topics of conversation with this amazing cast, which is like Ralph Fiennes, Stanley Tucci, John Lithgow, Isabella Rossellini. Yeah, it's like a real movie. And I think it will get nominated for some Oscars. Yeah, but it's also just like really fun and thoughtful and thought-provoking. And that one, I believe, has been out for about a month, and it might be rentable by now, actually, now that I think about it. So you might be able to watch it for $3 at home now. But it actually centers on the same question as Heretic, which is like, what is the role of certainty in faith?
Yeah.
And that, I feel like, is indicative that that's a question that a lot of people are asking right now.
Now, are there any faith-based, and I don't want to be mean, and I don't want faith-based movie hive to come yell at me, but are there any kind of, what do they call it? They call it Christian movie companies or whatever that is.
They call themselves faith-based usually.
Yeah. So like, are there any kind of faith-based films that have risen above the kind of noise to say these at least seem interesting? Right. It's okay if the answer is no. It's okay if the answer is no.
I mean, this year has been not great. 10 years ago, the answer would have been unequivocally yes. I think something that's happened in the last 10 years is that in order to raise money, a lot of these movies have become sort of more stealthily or not so stealthily political than they would have been 10 years ago, which, because they're trying to fund themselves in a context in which a lot of the potential funders equate those two things, right?
So that's a very interesting insight that I will just repeat it because I don't want you to have to say more than you're allowed to say. In order, there is a tension in the creation of faith-based content between what a person might want to produce and what someone might want to fund. And the funding might be concerned with getting certain political agendas across in the context of not just encouraging one's spiritual life, but advocating for a certain political worldview.
Yeah. And that's not true of all of them. Like, I think the one I saw this year that I was like, okay, was Cabrini, which I thought was a little bit loopy as a movie, but like as a story, I thought, well, this is inspirational. I actually don't know much about this Mother Cabrini, who like really did a lot of work to aid the poor and the orphans and the helpless in New York City in her time, and like went up against the mayor. I think John Lithgow is also in that movie, oddly enough, now that I think about it. But
John's out here, he's out here cashing checks.
He's out here being Catholic on TV, I guess. Yeah. But, and I thought that was an admirable movie because it didn't seem to, its agenda, it had one, but its agenda was about how sometimes you have to stand up against church authorities in order to do God's work.
Yeah.
But, I have been increasingly disappointed with a lot of faith-based films because they feel very one note, and they've always been a little one note. Like I always got the sense, with most of them, I always got the sense that this was like a sermon illustration, not a movie.
Yeah, not a movie.
Yeah, but that hasn't always been completely true. I remember years ago the movie Amazing Grace about William Wilberforce. That was a very good movie.
Yeah.
And they're out there, but a lot of the time, I think if you want to go find like a really nuanced or just interesting engagement with religious themes, you go to the mainstream because that's where you're going to get a Conclave or a Silence or something like that has more nuance and is more interested in the characters than it is in the messages.
Yeah. So I think great art will carry its own religious themes. Look at this. You're teaching us stuff. So we are at Christmas. We are at Christmas.
Yes.
And I know I have the classics that I always watch every year at Christmas. Maybe I'll ask you, are there any, once again, are there Christmas movies that people don't watch every year that they might want to pull out and give a chance you can get for our audience?
So I am not great with Christmas movies. I have to be honest.
Oh my goodness!
I know.
That's a. How could you not be great with Christmas movies?
Well, a lot of them are pretty bad.
They're not bad. No, listen. Let me explain. You have to get yourself in the emotion.
No such thing as bad. Yeah.
Put on the sweater. Like get some hot cocoa. You know,
definitely
just like
need the sweater.
You get the tree. Like get the whole thing.
Well, I will name two. Okay. One is And I think a lot of people watch this at Christmas, but when I was a kid, the one that we always watched for whatever reason in my house was White Christmas, the old Bing Crosby, Danny Kaye, I don't remember who else was in it, kind of a movie musical. And I feel like, it's worth revisiting. It's just like sweet and funny and kind of, it's a comedy, and it snows, and it used to snow here all the time and it barely snows anymore. So it's nice to watch that. Yes. So that's one to look for. And then last year, if you missed The Holdovers starring Paul Giamatti, that one definitely qualifies as a Christmas movie. And it's also something a little deeper. It's just about like a grumpy school teacher who sort of learns the true meaning of Christmas kicking and screaming. They never say the words true meaning of Christmas. Just if you're like me and you're a little... and I think a lot of people probably missed that one, and it's worth like pulling out and watching again.
Paul Giamatti is always Paul Giamatti in every movie, and he's great. Like he can chew dialogue like nobody's business.
He absolutely can. And also, it's worth saying that I'm trying to remember who the actress is. Divine Joy Randolph in it. She plays like a mother who's been bereaved, and she's the cook at the school. It's a boarding school, and she won an Oscar for her performance. So it's like, it's a great movie. Yeah, and she was fantastic.
I'm going to give Mike a chance. Mike, you should be able to do this. Mike, are you still there for us? Mike, is he gone? I was going to give him a chance.
No, I'm here.
There we go. Okay, this is low hanging fruit, Mike. Give us, since Alissa is the Scrooge of Christmas movies. Are there two Christmas movies that are going to be played at your house during this season?
I have an answer. One would be, it's cliche, but It's a Wonderful Life.
Okay.
I know it's a classic, but
technically a New Year's movie.
Technically a New Year's movie. Okay.
It's okay. It's fair.
Wow.
Okay.
But I love the message of the movie that like his life doesn't instantly get better when he wakes up from his vision, and yet he recognizes it's a wonderful life. Yeah. The good, the bad, the ugly, all of it with it. Why are
so
you laughing,
on brand.
Esau?
It's just so sweet. It's such a sweet answer.
It is. And then on the other end of the spectrum, it's Elf. I mean, it's just Will Ferrell, so funny, and just brings our family a lot of joy.
One thing that I had to value on podcasts is like being honest. And I would say, like, there's so many Christmas movies, but I will mention like three. These ones are gonna be boring. One of them is the Christmas, the Charlie Brown Christmas.
Right, of course.
The Muppets Scrooge.
Oh,
That's the one. The Muppet one that you have to do.
That's the best one. Mm-hmm.
And growing up, and I've not seen it in a long time because I'm not sure I can show it to my kids. But what's the Christmas one where the guy puts his tongue on the
Christmas Story.
A Christmas Story.
Yeah.
So like he wanted the he like so I mean those are the three that I used to watch every year growing up. So I don't know if there's a moral center to those three movies, but those are the three that I might mention as Christmas classics. And I'm pretty sure
they're all delightful. They're all great picks.
Okay.
Yes.
So
yes.
I will have us end our conversation on this. So you've given us some stuff for Christmas. You've given us some off the beat stuff. You've kind of given us some decent homework for those of us who want to be better moviegoers. But for those of us who aren't professional movie watchers, is there a tip or something that you do as a film critic that helps you appreciate a film better, that you would think that most of us who are not film critics don't do? Did you say, pay attention to this when you watch a film?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest overarching way to put this is that, I don't remember who it was, but somebody once said, a movie is not just what it's about, but how it's about it. Right. So like the visual language or the structure, that can be like an extra clue to how you should be taking in the movie. Like I think a lot of people tend to react to a movie as like, I felt sympathy or I didn't, or like I felt relatable. It felt it was relatable or something. And like as a film critic, I don't have that luxury. So I just have to watch everything. But also, I'm thinking about, okay, so an interesting part of this might be Conclave, just to go back to one we've talked about. So if and when you watch that movie, and I hope you do, there are a number of scenes where if you are watching with your eyes instead of looking at your phone or something, you will see that they have lit it to look like a Renaissance painting. Like, it looks exactly like a Renaissance painting. And that is so interesting, right? Because first of all, it's just like, it looks pretty, sure. But also you start to think, well, why did they do that? Because someone made that choice. And it's never just because it looks pretty. It's always because there's a reason to do that. And in this case, I think it has something to do with that movie is partly about like tradition and the long history of the church, and how any choice that is made reflects back on like literally thousands of years of history. And, they didn't have to light it like a Renaissance painting. They could have lit it like anything they wanted. But like thinking about all the elements of the film instead of just the plot, which is what most people do. I always tell people, you can have a movie without sound. You can have a movie without a plot, but you can't have a movie without images, because that's just a podcast. Right? So the way I do this is I'm taking notes while I'm watching it. And then when I get to the end, sometimes I look at the notes, sometimes I don't. But just the act of having scribbled things down while I was watching it the way I would if I was reading a book, helps me to like solidify like points in my head that I can go back and sort of draw a conclusion out of. And that's all my job is. It's not about deciding if things are good or bad.
Yeah.
Really.
So,
it's,
So what we'll do is we will have you come back to us maybe around, if you're not too busy, around Oscar season or before the blockbuster season, to give us some previews looking forward to what's coming. But thank you so much for helping us to become better watchers of television. Well, not television, because you were watching Ken Burns. That part was a failure on your part. But otherwise, you did an amazing job of making us better informed consumers of media. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Of course. Thank you so much for the invitation. We'll do it again for sure.
Yes. The Esau Macaulay podcast is a production of Holy Post Media, produced by Mike Stay Low, Stray Low. If you know, now you know. Edited by Seth Gorvet, like a Corvette. Music by Rob Noor. Make sure to follow the show wherever you get your podcast and leave a review so more people can find it. See you next time. I'm out.
I'm penning these letters with prayers they can aid your endeavors. It's clever benevolence, tasted it, wrestle with, still wrestling. Touch my side and it crushed my pride and told me I'm blessed within. Receive a Christian platitude with gratitude, but in the saddest news I live in doesn't add up to the Beatitudes. Catch me in the catacombs, chiefing like they Pat Mahomes, catching bullets, tackle foes, running plays, defending zones. Field got him doing football numbers, only half is grown. He was acting grown.